she won't forget him in Europe."
"He will forget her, then."
Mrs. Almond looked serious. "Would you really like that?"
"Extremely," said the doctor.
Mrs. Penniman, meanwhile, arranged another secret meeting with Morris Townsend outside a church. She had been a little alarmed by her brother's coldness towards her. "I think you should wait for a while before you marry," she told Morris. "Wait until my brother is less angry." The young man was very annoyed. "Last week you advised me to marry immediately," he said. "Catherine has already agreed to this, so what can I do?" "Catherine loves you so much that you can do anything," said Mrs. Penniman. "You can change your plans this way or that way, and she will not be upset with you." Morris looked at her, but said nothing, and soon after that they parted. Catherine, of course, knew nothing of her aunt's meeting with Morris, and she had not spoken to her father since the evening she went to see him in his study. At last, however, she told him that she had seen Morris Townsend again. "I think we shall marry before very long," she said. The doctor looked at her coldly from head to foot. "Why do you tell me that? It is of no interest to me." Catherine turned away for a moment. There were tears in her eyes. "Oh, Father," she cried, "don't you care?" "Not at all. Once you marry, it is the same to me when or where or why you do it." But the next day he spoke to her in a different way. "Are you going to marry in the next 4 or 5 months?" "I don't know, Father," said Catherine. "It is not very easy for us to decide." "Wait, then, for 6 months, and meanwhile I will take you to Europe. I would very much like you to go." This sign of her father's interest in her gave Catherine great happiness. "It would be delightful to go to Europe," she said. But her happiness soon disappeared when she realized that she would not see Morris for several months. Mrs. Penniman was not invited, and she understood very well why the doctor had made this plan. "He thinks the journey will make you forget Morris," she told her niece. Catherine could not decide whether to obey her father's wishes or not. She wrote to Morris and asked him to meet her in the square. They met the next day, and during a long walk she told him about her father's invitation. "He thinks I will forget you," said Catherine. "Well, my dear, perhaps you will. There are so many exciting things to see in Europe." "Please don't say that," Catherine answered gently. "I am not interested in seeing Europe." "You should go," said Morris. "It will please your father, and perhaps he will forgive you and change his mind about disinheriting you." "And not get married for so long?" "We can marry when you come back," said Morris. "You can buy your wedding clothes in Paris." They were away, in fact, for a year, and during the first 6 months the name of Morris Townsend was not mentioned. The doctor found much to interest him in Europe, but although Catherine was always quiet and obedient, she was, her father thought, a very unintelligent companion. One day, at the end of the summer, they were walking together in a lonely valley in the mountains. It was beginning to get dark, and the air was cold and sharp. Suddenly, the doctor stopped and looked at Catherine.
"Have you given him up?" he asked.
The question was unexpected, but Catherine did not hesitate. "No, Father," she answered. He looked at her for some moments without speaking.
"Does he write to you?" he asked.
"Yes, about twice a month." The doctor looked up and down the mountain and said in a low voice,
"I am very angry."
"I am sorry," Catherine murmured. She felt lonely and frightened in this wild place.
"One day he will leave you," said the doctor, "alone and hungry, in a place like this. That's what he will do."
"That's not true, Father, and you should not say it," she cried. "It's not right." He shook his head slowly.
"No, it's not right, because you won't believe it. But it is true."
Dr. Sloper did not speak of Morris again until the night before they sailed to New York.
"What are you going to do when you get home?" he asked suddenly.
"Do you mean about Mr. Townsend?"
"About Mr. Townsend."
"We shall probably marry."
"So you will go off with him as soon as you arrive?"
Catherine did not like the way he said this. "I cannot tell you until we arrive," she said.
"If I am going to lose my only child, I would like to know before it happens."
"Oh, Father, you will not lose me," said Catherine. Chapter 8. The Last Parting. Catherine did not go off with Morris Townsend when she arrived in New York, but she did hear news of him from her aunt during her first evening home. In fact, while she had been away, Morris had been a frequent visitor in Washington Square, taking tea with Mrs. Penniman and sitting in Dr. Sloper's study to smoke cigars. Mrs. Almond had told her sister that she was behaving foolishly. "You should not be so friendly with him, Lavinia," she said. "He will make Catherine a bad husband. If he marries her and she doesn't get Austin's money, he will hate her for his disappointment and will be cruel to her. The poor girl will have a miserable life." But Mrs. Penniman did not listen to her sister, and on Catherine's return she told her niece that she had taken good care of her lover while she had been away. "And how is your father?" she asked. "Has he changed his mind about disinheriting you?" "No. In Europe I saw that I shall never change him," said poor Catherine. I expect nothing from him now." "You have become very brave," said Mrs. Penniman with a short laugh. "I didn't advise you to give up your property." "Yes, I am braver than I was. I have changed in that way. I have changed very much. And it isn't my property. If Morris doesn't care about it, then I don't care either." Mrs. Penniman hesitated. "Perhaps he does care about it." "He cares about it because he doesn't want to injure me. But he knows that I am not afraid of that. Besides, I have my own money. We shall have enough to live well." The next day Morris Townsend came to visit Catherine. "I am very glad you have come back," he said. "It makes me very happy to see you again." He looked at her, smiling, from head to foot. When Catherine saw his handsome face again, she found it hard to believe that this beautiful young man was hers. She was very happy, and without waiting for him to ask, she told Morris about her father. "We must not expect his money now," she said, "and we must live without it." Morris sat looking and smiling. "My poor dear girl," he cried. "You must not be sad for me," said Catherine. Morris continued to smile, and then he got up and walked around the room. "Let me talk to him," he said. "I want to prove to your father that he is wrong about me." "Please don't, Morris," said Catherine sadly. "We must ask nothing from him. I know he will never change." "Why not?" She hesitated for a moment. "He is not very fond of me," she said slowly, "and I think he despises me. I saw it, I felt it in England just before we left. It is because he is so fond of my mother, who died so many years ago. She was beautiful and very, very clever. He is always thinking of her. I am not at all like her. Aunt Penniman has told me that. Of course, it isn't my fault, but neither is it his fault." "You are a strange family," said Morris. "Don't say that. Don't say anything unkind," Catherine said. "You must be very kind to me now, because, Morris—" Here she hesitated. "Because I have done a lot for you." "I know that, my dear." "It has been terrible for me to feel so distant from my father, to feel that he despises me. I would be so miserable if I didn't love you. We must be very happy together. And Morris, you must never despise me." This was an easy promise to make, and Morris made it. But for the moment, he made no further promises. Dr. Sloper spoke to both his sisters soon after his return. He told Mrs. Penniman that he would never accept Morris Townsend as a son-in-law, and he told Mrs. Almond that he was now no longer amused by Catherine, only annoyed. "She will never give Mr. Townsend up," said Mrs. Almond. "Then she will be very unhappy, and I can't prevent it." "Poor Catherine," said Mrs. Almond. "We must be as kind to her as we can." Mrs. Penniman arranged another secret meeting with Morris. They went for a long walk together, and she told him what the doctor had said. "He will never give us a penny," said Morris angrily. After a pause, he added, "I must give her up." Mrs. Penniman was silent for a moment. Though she thought of Morris as a son, she was also a little afraid of him. "I think I understand you," she said gently. "But my poor Morris, do you know how much she loves you?" "No, I don't. I don't want to know." "It will be very hard for Catherine," said Mrs. Penniman. "You must help her. The doctor will help you. He will be delighted with the news." "He will say, 'I always told you so.'" Morris blushed bright red. "I find this all very unpleasant," he said. "A true friend would try and make it easier for me." "Would you like me to tell her?" Mrs. Penniman asked. "You mustn't tell her, but you can—" He hesitated, trying to think what Mrs. Penniman could do. "You can explain that I don't want to come between her and her father." "Are you not going to come and see her again?" "Oh, no, I shall come again. But I want this business to end soon. I have been 4 times since she came back, and it's very hard work." "But you must have your last parting," his companion cried. For Mrs. Penniman, the last parting between lovers was almost as romantic as the first meeting. Morris came to Washington Square again, without managing the last parting, and again, and again. Catherine did not suspect anything was wrong, and Mrs. Penniman was too frightened to say anything to her. During each visit, the poor girl waited for Morris to name the day of their wedding, but he never stayed more than a few minutes, and seemed so uncomfortable that at last she became worried. "Are you sick?" she asked him. "I am not at all well," he said, "and I have to go away." "Go away? Where are you going, Morris?" He looked at her, and for a second or two she was afraid of him. "Will you promise not to be angry?" he said. "Angry? Do I get angry?" "I have to go away on business, to New Orleans." "What is your business?" "Your business is to be with me." He told her a long story about a chance he had to make a lot of money buying cotton. But Catherine took his arm in her 2 hands and spoke more violently than he had ever heard her speak before. "You can go to New Orleans some other time.
This isn't the moment to choose. We have waited too long already."
"You said you would not be angry," cried Morris. He got up to leave. "Very well. We won't talk about it any more. I will do the business by letter."
"You won't go?" said Catherine, looking at him.
Morris wanted to argue with her. It would make it easier for him to break away. "You mustn't tell me what to do," he said. "Try and be calmer the next time I come."
"When will you come again?"
"I will come next Saturday," said Morris.
"Come tomorrow," Catherine begged. "I want you to come tomorrow. I will be very quiet."
Suddenly, she felt very frightened and did not want him to leave the room. Morris kissed the top of her head. Catherine felt her heart beat very fast.
"Will you promise to come tomorrow?"
"I said Saturday," Morris answered, smiling. He tried to be angry at one moment and smile at the next. It was all very difficult and unpleasant.
"Yes, Saturday too," she answered, trying to smile. "But tomorrow first."
He was going to the door, and she went with him quickly. "I am a busy man," cried Morris. His voice was so hard and unnatural that she turned away. He quickly put his hand on the door, but in a moment she was close to him again, murmuring,
"Morris, you are going to leave me."
"Yes, for a little while, until you are reasonable again."
"I shall never be reasonable in that way."
She tried to keep him longer.
"Think of what I have done," she cried. "Morris, I have given up everything."
"You shall have everything back."
"You wouldn't say that if you didn't mean something. What is it? What has happened? What have I done? What has changed you?"
"I will write to you. That is better."
"You won't come back," she cried, tears running down her face.